50,000 Romans roaring inside the Colosseum, sunlight flashing off bronze helmets, trapdoors opening beneath the sand, fighters rising into the light as the crowd chants for blood. Movies make it look simple, slaves forced to fight to the death for a cruel emperor's entertainment. But the real story of gladiators is stranger, darker, and far more complex, because many of them were volunteers. Some became celebrities, some grew rich, and most of them did not die in the arena. So who were these men and women who stepped onto the sand? And what did life as a gladiator actually look like? The word gladiator comes from gladius, the Roman short sword. But the idea of gladiatorial combat was not originally Roman. Most historians believe the Romans borrowed it from the Etruscans, a pre-Roman civilization in central Italy. Another theory traces it to the Samnites of southern Italy, enemies Rome once fought in brutal wars. The earliest recorded gladiator match in Rome took place in 264 BCE. It was not public entertainment. It was part of a funeral held by the family of Decimus Junius Brutus Pera. The combat was meant as a blood offering to honor the dead. But Romans quickly realized something. Crowds loved it. What began as a funeral ritual turned into mass entertainment and then into a political tool. By the time of Julius Caesar, gladiator games had become a way to win public support. In 65 BCE, Caesar hosted games with hundreds of fighters to honor his father. The public adored him for it. Later emperors made the games state-sponsored spectacles. After a military victory, Trajan reportedly staged thousands of fights over several months. This was not just entertainment, it was crowd control, a way to distract, impress, and keep the population loyal. Most early gladiators were prisoners of war, slaves, or criminals sentenced to fight. Yet Roman society had a strange fascination with them. Legally, gladiators were marked with infamia, the same low social status as actors and prostitutes. They had limited rights and were considered morally stained, and yet they were admired. Graffiti praised them. Women wrote love messages to them. Their images appeared in homes, on lamps, and in art. Some Romans even believed gladiator blood had healing properties. By the late Republic, something surprising happened. Many gladiators were volunteers. Free Roman men signed contracts to become fighters. They were not forced. They chose this life for money, fame, or because they had fallen into debt and had no other path. They took stage names. They became public figures. Some even returned to the arena after earning their freedom. One emperor, Commodus, became obsessed with gladiatorial combat and fought in the arena himself, although usually against weaker opponents. Gladiators were both despised and idolized. They represented Roman ideas of toughness, discipline, and courage. Gladiators did not simply wait to die. They trained like professional athletes. They lived in schools called Ludi, run by a manager known as a lanista. These schools were strict, organized, and highly professional. The most famous of these was the Ludus Magnus, located right next to the Colosseum. It even had seating where spectators could watch training sessions. Gladiators trained under instructors called doctors, specialists in different fighting styles. They practiced with wooden weapons, drilled for hours, and followed routines similar to Roman soldiers. They also received surprisingly advanced medical care. The famous physician Galen worked with gladiators and studied their injuries, helping advance Roman medical knowledge. They ate high-energy diets rich in grains and beans to build body mass. They were valuable investments. Owners did not want them dying easily. Inside the school, gladiators formed tight bonds. They lived, trained, and sometimes died together. Gladiators were not all the same. They were carefully matched for dramatic effect. A few common types included Retiarius, lightly armored, armed with a net and trident. Fast and agile. Heavily armored with shield and sword, designed to chase down the Retiarius. Wore a large helmet with a fish-shaped crest and fought with a sword and shield. Inspired by warriors from Thrace, carried a curved sword and small shield. These matchups were intentional. Speed versus strength. Light armor versus heavy armor. Every fight was a performance designed for maximum drama. Some fighters battled wild animals, though these bestiaria were technically a separate class. Despite popular belief, most gladiator fights did not end in death. Training a gladiator was expensive. Keeping them alive made financial sense. Historians estimate that the majority of fights ended with one fighter wounded or surrendering, rather than being killed. A wounded gladiator could raise a finger to ask for mercy. The crowd and the sponsor of the games decided his fate. The famous thumbs up or thumbs down for movies is likely wrong. Ancient sources suggest gestures were more complex and not standardized. Gladiator matches typically lasted 10 to 15 minutes and followed strict rules, almost like modern combat sports. Women fought as gladiators too, though rarely. These female fighters were real enough that Roman writers mention them, and inscriptions record their names. One famous pair, Amazon and Achillea, fought bravely and were both spared. Some emperors used female fights as spectacles. But in 200 CE, Emperor Septimius Severus banned women from fighting in the arena. For centuries, gladiator games were central to Roman culture, but things began to change with the rise of Christianity. Christian writers criticized the bloodshed and pagan nature of the games. By the late 4th century, even emperors were converting. In 399 CE, Emperor Honorius closed the gladiator schools. A few years later, according to tradition, a Christian monk tried to stop a fight and was killed by the crowd. The story shocked the empire. Soon after, gladiatorial combat was officially banned. After more than 600 years, the games ended. Gladiators were not just doomed slaves fighting to the death. They were prisoners, volunteers, celebrities, athletes, and symbols of Roman power all at once. They lived between fame and disgrace, between slavery and freedom, between survival and spectacle. And even today, when we watch movies or documentaries about ancient Rome, the image of the gladiator still fascinates us, because their world was brutal, dramatic, and deeply human, a mirror of the society that cheered for them.